Yo, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? It is your boy Zeddy here, back at it again to drop part 2 for the amazing series of What If Deku Was Mikey's Reincarnation. Now, boys, not gonna lie to you guys, I have been waiting to drop the second part of this because right now, while I was scripting it at school. I think I was like in buff block. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but basically it's like that little free period that we get to like do makeup assignments and stuff like that. But while I was doing that stuff, dude, I mean, honestly, I can't begin to tell you guys how hyped I was to start working on the Mikey Reincarnation script. And the way that I wrote it, I honestly don't know how you guys are going to take this. I feel like I did a great job with the script for today. And it's basically going to be the finale to What If Deku Was Mikey's Reincarnation. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's part. That being said, check out the links that I have in the description, seeing as, you know, you might find my Discord server, the Akatsuki group channel, and other stuff such as that. That being said, though, guys, I don't want to waste you guys' time too much, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're basically going to pick up our story where we had left off on the last part. See, if you guys don't remember, I'm going to be giving a little bit of a brief background as to what happened on the last part, seeing as, you know, it has been a little bit of time since the last part. Okay, so obviously Deku grew up with a little bit of a rougher childhood. He was adopted by a martial artist by the name of Saejima, who ended up passing away a couple years later. Deku ended up meeting a dragon, and, you know, he basically, I said bossically, but he was basically going to I just said that word way too many times, didn't I? But yeah, anyways, that being said, he basically met Draken. You know, Draken ended up dying, sadly. And Deku basically started spiraling down a pretty bad path, where he started taking mercenary jobs and basically hunting people down who basically ended up being responsible for the death of Draken, is what Deku has been up to for this past couple time. He ended up biting off a little bit more than he could chew and trying to take down Aizawa, to which he successfully did. However, during that basically mission, a bunch of heroes ended up attacking him, and that led to Deku being taken to prison. However, the government ended up offering Deku a deal to pretty much become a pro hero that does very illegal missions, I guess you could say. Deku ended up accepting, going to the Quirk not the Quirk exam, but the UA entrance exam, and Deku actually ended up basically being accepted. Because if you guys didn't watch the last part, and you know, it has been a bit, I'm pretty sure I gave Deku about 200 points. So yeah, Deku most definitely was given the opportunity to go in. Okay, so with that little recap out of the way, we can now basically pick our story back off. Okay, so we pick off with Deku essentially finally arriving towards the location that he just got texted on his phone. Deku would have whipped out his phone right after the exam and everything, and would basically start walking home, as people surrounding him would just be looking at him jaw dropped, like just completely like, yo, that kid is not normal whatsoever. He literally destroyed a 0-pointer, just completely annihilated it with power almost equivalent to a 100% smash. That being said, Deku basically excuse me, guys, not gonna lie, my throat feels like low-key dry. Oh my god, I should have never said that. Y'all are about to start saying some sussy stuff down below in the comments, aren't you? I can just feel it now. Anyways, that aside, this is when we will now basically have Deku, arrive at the location that he was texted. Deku would basically get to that place as he would see a giant building. It would be filled with stories on top of stories of buildings, and Deku would basically proceed to go inside. This is when Deku would essentially just chill inside at the top penthouse, which is where he's actually going to be kept. Because Deku, you know, they don't exactly want Deku to be out on the streets 24/7, because if he is, he's gonna cause a problem for them. So they gave him the best living conditions. They gave him a jacuzzi inside of a jacuzzi, inside of another jacuzzi, and a pool under all of those things. So, you know, basically, to put it bluntly, Deku is living the rich life. Not to say that Deku couldn't do that with his own money, because honestly he could. Deku has made a fortune off of being a merc with you know, for the past couple of years that he was doing that for. And well, this is when Deku would honestly just be chilling at Japan's finest little hotel place, I guess we could say. Deku would proceed to essentially react over the time of the weekend. However, there would be one thing that he would have to do, which kind of just derails him from relaxing, I guess you could say. He would have a meeting with the leaders of the government, which basically ended up hiring Deku, and they would essentially explain to Deku what his priorities and what his missions will be. Deku would arrive there, of course, as he's just like, well, get to talking. They would basically proceed to open up a briefcase, and inside they would essentially take out something. As they would hold it in front of Deku, they would proceed to tell him to read this, as Deku would basically read the terms and conditions of his contract, and he would say that this is ludicrous, but he's in. As they would all smile, this is when Deku would basically look at them and say, don't get too comfortable. As it's at this point that Deku would basically just hear out what everything is that he basically has to do. They would begin to tell him that Deku is basically going to be in charge of assassination missions, and his goal is basically going to be to wipe out fake heroes. See, there's a lot of heroes out there who are simply doing things for the money, and there's a lot of corrupt heroes. So Deku's job is essentially to take care of those, as well as take care of villains, which are just they're just a problem in general. Deku's top priority target is All for One, a villain which they would explain to Deku what his backstory is and all that stuff, and Deku would just be shocked. The villain that can pass down quirks, that sounds incredible. There may be a little something there for Deku if he plays his cards right. That being said though, Deku would of course basically after the meeting would just be like, alright, this seems pretty easy enough. You know, it doesn't seem like anything out of the, impossible, I guess is what the word I'm looking for is. There's nothing really impossible here. And that's honestly just the only thing that Deku would pretty much be thinking. Deku at this point would basically walk out, grab his things, and make it back to the penthouse, to which he would basically end up chilling for the remainder of the time before he basically gets his letter and gets accepted. Of course, he would get accepted, and this is when we will now be jumping over to his first day at UA College. Deku would get his stuff in order, put on the school uniform, and basically put on some very drippy shoes. He'd put on a Rolex, and he'd pull on a chain which costs like about, it costs as much as your rent. I don't know if you guys can remember that reference, but Lil Tay, yeah, he'd basically be pulling that. As it's at this point that Deku would basically start making his way to class. Of course, Deku would arrive in a limousine, and Deku would just make a pretty big entrance. However, this is when somebody from behind him would actually come in with another limousine, this being Momo Yaoyorozu. And Deku would get kind of irked. He's like, dang, like, you really out here trying to flex on my flex? Deku would come outside, and he would basically come out looking drippy. And this one, Momo would notice Deku. Deku would pretty much just completely ignore her because she doesn't seem at all interesting to him. If anything, she just seems like a little underconfident rich girl, and that just is not going to slide to Deku. That being said though, this is when Deku would finally arrive to the door of UA, and immediately as soon as he sees it, he would just be like, why is the door so big? He would honestly just think about that for a couple of seconds and then proceed to just be like, it's none of my business. As he would open the door and say, has some weight to it. But after he does that, he would immediately walk into a sight which immediately angers Deku. He would see a little Pomeranian looking kid and that one boy with the blue hair arguing. As Deku would immediately just give Ida a glare, and Ida would immediately just back away from Bakugou, and immediately afterwards Deku would stare down Bakugou, as Bakugou would look at Deku and say, huh, you got a problem with me, kid? As he would then stand up on top of the desk and say, we can go right now, as Aizawa at this point would wake up and be like, you're not going to be going anywhere. Now sit back down or I'll expel you. As Bakugou would immediately just get back down onto his seat, and it's at this point that Aizawa would basically proceed to give them all directions, essentially telling them all to meet him outside, putting on the gym uniforms because they are going to be having a quirk assessment. Uraraka would immediately say, what about the orientation? And Aizawa would just be like, nah, there's no time for that. Real heroes don't go to events where they're just going to be told how great they are. They're always fighting against time. As Uraraka would hear that, she would say like, Loki got a point, as they would all basically get suited up, and Deku would seem in the head of being a perv, but he would kind of just chuckle at that as he walks away, and this is when he would meet everybody outside. Now, It's at this point that they would basically have the Quirk exam, and Deku would do pretty great at that, to say the least. See, when Deku was in the locker room, he actually ended up meeting somebody who actually ended up catching a little bit of his attention. He seemed to have a very outgoing and strange personality, I guess is the simplest way I can put it. His personality basically was along the lines of, well, what's it called? Pretty like happy and just like manly, you know. And we all know who this is. It's Kirishima, bro. Kirishima ended up catching Deku's attention. He seems pretty strong, as if he knows how to take a hit. And that's something that Deku can definitely respect. That being said, the test would obviously begin with the ball throw. Deku would have the ball thrown at him, as Deku would reel his arm back and end up getting a score of 203 meters with nothing but his brute strength alone. Immediately, Aizawa would show him his score and tell him that he knows he wasn't going all out, and that unless he wants to get expelled from UA, he needs to start trying. Deku would immediately give Aizawa a glare, and as soon as Aizawa sees the way that those eyes looked at him, he would have a little bit of a flashback to that man who he fought in the alleyway so long ago. However, Deku will then proceed to basically just grab the ball and use his quirk, as he uses his will to pretty much will it so that the ball, you like what I did there? He wills it so that the ball would pretty much end up going very, very far. And yeah, Deku ends up doing pretty great in terms of that stuff. That being said though, guys, this is when Deku would essentially proceed to take part in the next couple of tests. And if you're wondering what he got for the ball throw, he ended up getting about, let's say, he multiplied his strength by 4 times. So 200, 600, 200 times 200 times 200, 800. He would get 800 since it was a 4 times boost. No, wait. Yeah, let's just say 4 times boost, right? It was some of you guys are probably going to be like, bro, your math is all off. But, you know, that doesn't matter. Anyways, this is a math class. This is what if class. Anyways, Deku would then proceed to take the grip strength test. He would shatter the machine, and he would then do the 50-meter dash, destroying Ida's time. Do the long jump, just breaking records upon records, and do the repeated side-to-side steps on some Saitama stuff. This is when they would do the 3 remaining tests, which are basically push-ups, sit-ups, and chin-ups and stuff like that, like pull-ups and stuff, right? It's basically what they end up doing for the last 3 tests. Deku would end up getting great marks for all of them because his body is at physical peak condition. And not only that, but Deku has been training in gymnastics and other things such as that stuff. That being said though, guys, this is when Deku would basically proceed to win the Quirk exam. However, one thing that would have definitely been bugging him as he was doing the exam was the way that Katsuki Bakugou was staring him down the entire time. He seemed to have held a grudge from the time that Deku told anything to Bakugou, and Deku was getting irked by the second. The only reason that he hadn't ran over there and busted his teeth in yet is because Aizawa was there, and Deku did not really have to feel like having to deal with that. So Deku kind of just let it slide, and this is when Deku would basically finally finish the Quirk exam. Everybody would have everything wrap up, and they would all start packing up to go home. Deku would grab his backpack and such, and this is when Deku would begin to follow Bakugou's route home. As Deku would notice that Bakugou's taking a train, Deku would hop on the same train, and Bakugou would immediately just take note of the fact that Deku's going the same direction as him. He would yell out to Deku and be like, "Hey nerd, you better not be following me or I swear I'm gonna put you 6 feet underground." Deku would look at Bakugou and just be like, as if you ever could. But he wouldn't even say a word. He would just keep looking up, as it's at this point that Bakugou would get off and Deku would stay. As Deku, about 2 seconds into basically staying on, he would say, "Wait, this is my stop." After they pretty much turned the corner, the guy would stop at the next bus stop, and it's at this point that Deku would pretty much start tailing Bakugou from behind. Deku would then climb up on top of a building, and it's at this point that Deku would pretty much realize where Bakugou's house is at, as Deku would immediately just be like, "Oh yeah, this is about to be fun." Deku would then proceed to wait until Bakugou has to come outside to take out the trash or something, and it's at this point that Bakugou would basically proceed to get ambushed by Deku. As soon as Bakugou goes outside to take out the trash for the day, as soon as he closes the lid and goes to walk back inside, Deku would jump down from the building, crushing Bakugou's skull into the pavement, and then spitting on him as he's just like, "You know what? You know something about me, Bakugou? I don't like when people disrespect me. Now, I'm going to ask you one time. What do you think you just did to me today. As Bakugou would immediately get up and flare explosions at Deku's direction. Deku would immediately use his quirk as he empowers himself 2 times, and he would rush at Bakugou as he hits him right in the gut, sending him crashing into the wall. This is when Mitsuki would hear the noise and would basically start rushing outside. However, Deku would grab Bakugou by the collar and throw him into the street, as immediately Bakugou would shoot explosions onto the roof, and Deku would begin to do parkour as he lands up there. Deku and Bakugou would start throwing the paws up on the roof, and this is when Bakugou would end up being grabbed by the collar by Deku once again, as Deku would give him a stare down, which completely causes Bakugou to go limp. Bakugou would just completely not be able to move an inch, and he would just feel terror. That same aura that, Stain was able to basically use against Endeavor and all the pro heroes and stuff is basically what Deku did to him. He used his bloodlust. And Aizawa, not Aizawa, but Bakugou was just done. Like, he literally left him on top of the roof. And the very next day, Mitsuki basically ended up finding him on top of there. She healed him up, and Bakugou returned to, the class the very next day with a couple of advantages. However, because of Recovery Girl, he recovered just before the Heroes vs. Villains stuff. That being said, class would be pretty boring, and nothing would really be going on up until the point where they basically have their final class of the day. Of course, All Might would bust in saying, "I am here!" coming in like a normal person. As he begins to say hi to all of the kids, Deku would notice All Might and just be like, pathetic. As Deku would honestly just ignore All Might. However, this is when All Might would finally show them all their costumes. Deku would immediately get suited up, and because Deku can't exactly wear his Tokyo Manji costume, because Aizawa is his teacher and he would definitely recognize him, Deku would actually end up being forced to wear something else. Something along the lines of a Special Forces agent. Something like if you guys have seen my OC, he would basically wear an outfit similar to that. Something that's on some X-Men type stuff, but all black, pretty much. And yeah, a Black Widow outfit, but for guys is pretty much what he wears. Yeah, that's the easiest way I can sum everything up. That being said, though, guys, this is when we will now be going over the teams. All Might would, of course, be like, the clothes make the pros, and everybody would get suited up, and they would meet outside, to which they would be teamed up. Just like in canon, however, Deku would be paired up with Uraraka. Jesus Christ. Excuse me. Sorry about that. But anyways, Deku would get paired up with Uraraka, just like in canon, and this is when he would be announced that he has to fight 2 very interesting adversaries. No, it's not going to be Bakugou. However, it will be Ida and Todoroki. Not Bakugou, because we already saw the way that Deku manhandled Bakugou, and I'm pretty sure you guys don't want to see a repeat of that all over again. So instead, I'm going to be switching Bakugou out for Todoroki, and Ida is going to remain because I just don't like Ida and I want him to get folded like a lawn chair. That being said, this is when Deku would basically walk up to Uraraka as she would say, "Hey, what's your..." As Deku would immediately just not say a word, and he would tell her that this is going to be the plan. Uraraka would look at him and she's like, "Huh? You didn't talk to me this whole time and now you're going to tell me a plan?" Deku would say, "Look, your quirk is gravity, right? Is it possible for you to take the gravity away from me for just a couple of seconds?" Uraraka would say that, "Yeah, it's a pretty easy task to do." And Deku would say, "Perfect. Well, that's what I'm going to need you to do now. I need you to take off my gravity so I can go by all the windows in the building and try to see if I can see the bomb from, the roof." Uraraka would be like, "That's actually not a bad plan." And Deku would then proceed to say, "Right." As Uraraka would tap him, Deku would then begin floating, and on the 4th floor, Deku would see Todoroki and Ida. Immediately after seeing that, Deku would basically land on one of the roof's ledges, and he would bust in straight through the window as he crashes in and immediately smacks Ida with one of those Mikey roundhouse kicks, as Ida is knocked out immediately. However, right as Deku began to rush at Todoroki, Todoroki would use his giant ice geyser to blast Deku outside of the room, back outside, and landing and crashing on the ground pretty hard. After that, Deku would get enraged, and he would use his will to basically rush at Todoroki 2 times faster than Todoroki could even react. Todoroki would start using his ice to basically catch himself every time Deku landed a punch, and Todoroki would shoot a giant iceberg at Deku, which would cause Deku to go back quite a bit. However, Deku would start using nothing but his raw physical strength to pretty much destroy chunks of the ice, leading to him getting close to Todoroki. And once he gets close, Deku would proceed to knock Todoroki the F out. I mean, if Aizawa was able to do it, then Deku could definitely mop the floor with Todoroki. Todoroki's not really that strong when you really think about it, because, I mean, he still doesn't have experience. He may have a strong quirk, and, you know, he may have a little bit of training. However, when it comes to fighting real people who have real combat experience, Todoroki is a bit on the weaker side. Oh my god. My bad, boys. I had to yawn real quick. But anyways, this is when Deku would basically proceed to knock out Todoroki, and immediately he would basically proceed to walk away from UA, as he would just grab his stuff and say, well, if that's it for today, I'm going to be leaving now. As All Might would try to stop Deku, but Deku would have been gone just right as All Might basically went outside the door to go grab Deku and tell him, hey, bro, you kind of can't leave yet. Deku would have already been gone. There was no stopping Deku at that point. And after that, this is when about 1 week of normal school events would pretty much go down. During this week, a couple of things would actually happen. Deku would finally have a couple of missions, and Deku would basically have to execute a couple of bad heroes, as well as take out a small villain who has been robbing a bunch of banks and getting away with it. Deku would end up finding him and putting a very thick bullet straight through the man's skull, causing him to be put on a t-shirt, and yeah, he would end up doing a lot of missions. On one specific day, he ended up doing 3 assassination missions, and on another, he ended up actually having to take a villain to Tartarus, because his quirk needs to be studied. That being said, this is when about 3 days into that 1 week that he basically has school for, Deku would proceed to have a little bit of a training day at the end of class with their hero course with Aizawa, to which Aizawa would basically fight all of his students and one by one and determine how far they are and what their weak areas and strong areas are, so that they could pretty much focus on improving their strong areas and basically trying to pretty much catch up with their weak and strong areas. So like they can be both strong and they can be stronger in the areas that they lack in. It's basically what bro, these keep sneaking up on me. I'm telling you guys, like I should be chilling, and then out of nowhere I yawn out of nowhere. It's probably because your boy probably didn't get too much good sleep last night, but that's not the point. That being said, though, during this time that they're pretty much doing these little fights against Aizawa, Deku would have actually shown a little bit too much of his skill sets. And during the time that he was basically fighting against Aizawa would have ended up noticing Deku's fighting style and movements. They would immediately rush at each other, as Aizawa would use a scarf to wrap it around one of Deku's arms. Deku would do a move very similar to the one that he did in the alleyway, where he would grab the scarf and yank Aizawa towards him. Aizawa would go flying towards Deku's direction. However, he would kick Deku square in the jaw, and Deku would basically stand there as he tanks the attack and then punches Aizawa square in the gut, causing all of the other students to get just shocked. Deku has zero access to his quirk, keep in mind, because Aizawa is definitely canceling it. However, Deku is still going blow for blow with Aizawa, and the look in Deku's eyes for victory reminds him of that same look that he got from that one vigilante that he had to fight against the other day, or more specifically, as Aizawa views it, that villain. That being said, this is when Deku would basically end up almost beating Aizawa. However, he was told not to stand out too much, so Deku would have ended up throwing in the towel and making it seem as if Aizawa beat him fair and square. However, Aizawa would be way wiser and realize that if he would have been going all out, he would have definitely lost. And Aizawa and Deku would both give each other a little bit of a stare, as Aizawa at that moment would realize who that is. Deku, upon realizing that Aizawa knows, would immediately formulate a plan to keep Aizawa quiet. As soon as class ends, Deku would stay behind, and Aizawa would say, "So, you're that kid, aren't you?" As Deku would say, "So what if I am?" Aizawa would look at him and say, "What are you doing here at this hero school? This isn't a place for villains like you." As Deku would look at Aizawa and say that my reasons are far beyond your understanding. I have things that I need to accomplish here at UA. And Aizawa would turn off his quirk, as immediately his hair would begin to rise, and he would look at Deku as he says, "If you try to harm my students." Deku would stop him there, as he's like, "Who said anything about harming them? I'm here to protect them. I'm simply here to get my hero license and get out of here, so I can formally become a hero and people would stop annoying me." Aizawa would immediately look at Deku and give him a glare, as he just tells him that that's not going to be happening on his watch. Deku would say, I was afraid you'd say that, as he would rush at Aizawa and immediately activate his quirk. Upon the second that Aizawa blinked, Deku would poke Aizawa square in the eyes, causing Aizawa to go blind for a second, and Deku would then proceed to start punching Aizawa square in the gut, smashing his head right into the desks and just slamming him from wall to wall, as Aizawa would proceed to get just completely bodied, and there would be absolutely zero hope for Aizawa to win this battle. That being said, this is when Deku would basically cause Aizawa to be quiet real quick, and it's at this point that Deku would have a couple more missions after the fact. Deku, after defeating Aizawa, would of course have one mission that same day, and he would basically just go back to his penthouse and chill until the day of the USJ, which is where we are going to basically time skip to. This is when Deku would proceed to talk with the people on the bus, such as Suyu, Mina, and what's her name, Invisible Girl, about who the strongest person in the class is. And a lot of people would begin to say that it's obviously Deku, seeing as he was able to go toe-to-toe with Aizawa, even without a quirk, and other people like them weren't able to do a thing to Aizawa because, well, put simply, they're pretty much nothing because they rely on their quirks far too much. Where was I? Not gonna lie, I kind of had to stop the recording for a second. But anyways, this is when Deku would have basically arrived to the USJ, to which, the Pro Hero 13 would begin to give her very, very lame speech, talking about some, guys, as you all know, quirks are incredible, however they can be dangerous, yada yada yada. And they would basically begin to do this, and that, until the inevitable arrival of Kurogiri basically arrives. Kurogiri would teleport in and immediately say, "Sorry we invited ourselves in, but we're here for all might." However, before he can finish the sentence, Deku would immediately click a button on his wrist, as he would send out an SOS signal, which would alert the heroes that the villains are here. And this is when Deku would proceed to basically get teleported away, as Deku would get teleported to the same section that he was in canon, and right as soon as he realizes where he is by a body of water, Deku would immediately activate his quirk, as he would basically push himself to that upper limit. He would use 10%, he would multiply his power by 10 times, because that is basically the max that Deku can get to. And that is about, let's say, 50% of one for all full caling, because, 10 times seems pretty reasonable. And that punch that he hit with a 0-pointer, I said it was similar to that of Deku, so not exactly the same force, but pretty decent in and of itself. That being said, this is when the heroes would basically get an SOS mission, and the SOS alert and All Might would definitely start making his way down to the USJ. However, while all of this would happen, Deku would basically jump out and shoot a giant burst of wind, which would create a mini tsunami within the water, taking out all of the villains which were in the water area of the USJ attack. And this is when Deku would immediately land right beside Aizawa's. He would do a superhero landing, that thing where they land and their fist is on the ground, their other hand is aiming up, and they're basically looking down, looking badass. Yeah, he would do that. This is when Deku would basically start messing up villains alongside Aizawa, and Aizawa would say, "What are you doing here?" He would say, "You better not be aligned with the villains." However, Deku would look at Aizawa and say, "I'm not aligned with them." As Aizawa would say, "Yeah, right." He would immediately deactivate Deku's quirk, and this is when Deku would start having a fight with Aizawa. As it's at this point that Shigaraki would be like, "That damn brat, he's taking out many of my minions. Nomu, kill him." As the Nomu would immediately rush at Deku, and Deku would barely be able to dodge, which would cause Aizawa to get flung back, because the punch that Deku dodged from the Nomu ended up hitting Aizawa instead, which would end up blowing Aizawa away, and it's at this point that Aizawa would get injured pretty badly. Deku would dodge more of the Nomu's attacks, however, the Nomu would then finally land one, as Deku would get sent flying, and Deku would get injured pretty bad. The Nomu would then start berating Deku with full-fledged attacks, and Deku would enhance himself by 10 times his original power, but it still wouldn't be enough. I don't know if you guys remember, but Deku landed a 100% smash on the Nomu, and it still didn't phase it. So Deku is going to have to find that weak point within the Nomu, or simply create one. Deku would start punching the Nomu as rapidly as he possibly can, and the Nomu would just start tanking attack after attack. as it slowly walks up to Deku and just starts pummeling him without any restraint. Shigaraki would rush at Deku and try to touch him with his 5 fingers. However, Deku would dodge every attack, and this one Kurogiri would finally arrive at the area, as he would basically start trying to help Shigaraki create portals to touch Deku, and Deku would end up getting caught by the Nomu. As Shigaraki would tell the Nomu not to kill him, he would say, "Restrain the brat," as he would rush right before Deku and say, "You've been quite a pain today, haven't you? You've been a little bit of a cheat code." Deku would then be restrained as Shigaraki would punch Deku square across the face and say, "How does that feel, boy?" Deku would look at Shigaraki and say, "Shut your mouth, man-child. Don't you dare speak to me that way," as he would give him the eyes of a literal, just a beast. And Shigaraki would step back as he would say, "Who are you to make me afraid of you? You're under my terms and conditions now. There's not a thing you'll be able to do to resist me." As at this point, Shigaraki would put his hands on Deku's arm, as he would basically place down the 5 fingers and start decaying Deku's body completely. Deku at this point would spit on Shigaraki's face, as basically that entire limb would disintegrate slowly, as it would start disintegrating, and the Nomu would hold him in place for the next 2 minutes, as that entire arm would be gone. And it's at this point that Deku would get loose from the Nomu, as with his other arm, he would shoot a bullet straight at Shigaraki's skull, causing Shigaraki to pretty much perish on sight. Deku would fall onto one knee as he's just holding himself in pain, and Deku would then proceed to basically just cough out some blood, as he would say, "Well, looks like I didn't exactly make it so far. Death, do your worst." As at this point, Deku would pass out due to blood loss, and Deku would proceed to be decayed. As this is where the story of What If Deku Was Mikey's reincarnation would end. If you guys didn't know, Mikey, however, even no matter how strong he is, he's still a human at the end of the day. And the quirk that I did end up giving Deku in this version of events was not enough to stop the Nomu. See, a 10 times multiplier to base human, even if you are superhuman, isn't going to get you anywhere above 50% full cowling. So that's pretty much why Deku still ended up losing, even though Deku was absurdly strong as Mikey's reincarnation. Due to the fact that the Nomu had shock absorption, Deku was simply not able to get around that. And after Shigaraki touched him with all 5 fingers, it was pretty much GG from there. The fact that Deku took Shigaraki with him was kind of just an added bonus. But with that being said, this is where we're going to be ending off today's What If. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, seeing as it was a lot of fun to make, and I hope you guys will come back for the next part, for the next couple of what ifs that I have to finish, such as Naruto with a One for All, and what if Naruto was a Dragon Slayer, aka what if Naruto was Natsu's reincarnation. With that being said, I love each and every single one of you guys. Check out my links in the description, and I am out. Peace.